Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the Blackhead ball python. The Blackhead is actually a dark morph, and I'd say out of all the dark morphs and ball pythons, the Blackhead is probably the darkest of the dark. Makes for some really awesome combos. If you mix other genes in with Blackhead, essentially what it does is it darkens the entire background of the snake. It's actually a codominant mutation, so if you take two Blackheads and breed them together, you end up with the Super Blackhead. And the Super Blackhead actually has some pattern in it. Some of these really dark morphs, if you actually make the super, sometimes it's a completely patternless snake, and I think that's one of the advantages of the Blackhead. It actually keeps a lot of the pattern. You can mix other genes into the super to make some really impressive combos. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to jump over to the internet and I want to show you the potential of the Blackhead ball python. Alright, so I want to jump over here on Morphmarket.com, and this is what a Blackhead looks like. And at first glance, you look at the Blackhead and you think that looks really similar to a normal, classic, wild type ball python. As a matter of fact, I did a video and I went through all my snakes from last year, including all my hatchlings, and someone actually pointed out one of my hatchlings and said, hey, that looks a lot like a Blackhead. It was a really dark normal, and it's kind of interesting. You actually start breeding Blackhead into other combos, and you can definitely tell there's something there. And if you actually look at this, it looks almost like a normal, except the black background is really super dark. And it seems like in most combos and in most standalone morphs, you have this really black head. Well, I think that's where they get the name from, the Blackhead. If you actually take two Blackheads, breed them together, 25% of the time you get a Super Blackhead. And take a look at this snake. This is pretty awesome. It's kind of interesting with the Super Blackhead. Sometimes you get the streaking on the sides and sometimes you don't. I'd say the streaking is, as far as dark morphs, if you really want a lot of streaking on the side, the Cinnamon is kind of probably the best dark morph for a lot of, the streaking of the pattern on the side. Sometimes it actually streaks on the Blackhead and sometimes it doesn't, but you can definitely tell in this case it has a really super black head, and I think that is where the name comes from. Really dark, super dark combo. And essentially what I want to do from here is I want to go over some of the base genes in ball python, some of the more common genes, and then I want to add Blackhead to the mix so you can really see what Blackhead does when you mix it in with some of these other base genes. And I kind of want to keep it simple. I don't want to go through too many multi-genes. I just want to start with one gene and mix in Blackhead so you can really see the effect with one gene versus the other in combination of both of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with Fire. Fire is kind of an interesting gene. Fire is considered to be a lightening gene. You actually mix it in with a lot of combos and it really lightens the background. And if you actually mix it in with some of the bright morphs like the Pastel and the Orange Dream, essentially what it does is it really cleans up the background and reduces a lot of the pixelation, really intensifies a lot of the colors. And in a lot of dark morphs you actually mix Fire in and it really reduces the blackness of the snake. So it's almost counterproductive working Fire into some of these dark morphs, but it's kind of interesting. You take Fire and you work it into Blackhead, and take a look at this. This is a Fire Blackhead, and the first thing that struck me on this is that the Fire didn't really reduce the darkness of the background color of the snake. It really, I'd say, as far as mixing in with other combos, the Blackhead is probably king for bringing out the darkness and really holding on to that really dark background. You can definitely see it when mixed with Fire. You can see a little bit, maybe on the top here, just a little bit. I've actually seen some Blackheads with a little bit of highlights in the back, and I would say the Fire doesn't really have that much of an effect when you're mixing it in with Blackhead. So here is the Pinstripe ball python. I really like the Pinstripe. I produce quite a few every year. It's like the brightest gold ball python that you can get. If you take Pinstripe, mix it in with Blackhead, take a look at this. This is the Pinstripe Blackhead. Essentially what it does, it takes the bright gold and it really darkens it. Darkens the overall snake, and you can definitely see it really darkens the head of the snake too with the Blackhead gene. And it's kind of interesting if you're going for, it's kind of the light on the dark. Sometimes it's a little difficult working certain genes together, and it really helps to look at some of the base genes. So for example, you're actually mixing two genes together. That's kind of the starting point that you want to think about as far as kind of the long-term goal, because a lot of people think, all right, what happens if I mix these 5 genes together? And essentially what you need to do is you need to break it down to 2 individual genes like the Pinstripe and the Blackhead as kind of the starting point. And then you start thinking, all right, what can I add to this combination conjunction to really enhance it and move the project along further. And I think it really helps just to really focus on 2 genes at a time. So here is the Pastel. The Pastel is like the bread and butter of the ball python industry. You can pick up Pastels, relatively inexpensive. And what the Pastel does is it really brings out a lot of yellow and reduces a lot of the pattern. The Pastel is a co-dominant morph. If you actually breed 2 of them together, you get a Super Pastel, which brings in a lot more whites in the dark, kind of like on the dark ridge of the snake, and it kind of washes out the head. Here's what happens if you take Pastel and you mix it in with Blackhead. Take a look at this snake. This is probably one of the most promising starting points for, you know, kind of moving a project along between the Pastel and the Blackhead. You get the really bright yellow kind of popping out of the snake, and you really keep the dark background, which is really awesome in this combo. You can definitely see on this one, it has a super jet black head. Here is a yellow belly, and I'd say as far as kind of sleeper genes, probably yellow belly is the king. If you look at the yellow belly, it doesn't look that much different than a normal ball python, but you start mixing it with a lot of other combos and it really brings out a lot of the yellow, and it really enhances a lot of combos. It's kind of one of those genes that's almost unexpected when you start mixing it in with other combos. It's pretty surprising what yellow belly can do. Here's what happens when you mix yellow belly with a Blackhead, and take a look at this combo. This is really promising too. As a matter of fact, you know, the first thing I'm thinking is if you actually took yellow belly and Pastel and started adding it in conjunction with the Blackhead and kind of built projects down that line, I bet you could get a really jet black background with some really bright colors just popping out. It's kind of interesting in this combo, you actually see some of the white coming up the sides, almost like the yellow belly flames coming up the sides of the snake and kind of lightening just the belly part right here. Pretty amazing combo. Here is the Mojave. The Mojave is actually in the blue-eyed leucistic. You breed 2 Mojaves together and you get an all-white snake with blue eyes. And if you're actually looking for an all-white snake, probably the best combo would be the Mojave crossed with a lesser. They say the Mojave lesser is like the brightest, purest, and cleanest white snake, and it usually has perfectly sized eyes. Sometimes the eyes in some of these blue-eyed leucistics can be, you know, bigger or smaller depending on the combo. And here's what happens when you mix Mojave in with the Blackhead, and take a look at this combo. This is really awesome too. It's kind of interesting how the Blackhead really keeps a really black background, but really allows a lot of these genes to really pop out. You get some really high contrast, I've noticed, with a lot of these combos. It's probably one of the best combos. I think the Mahogany was up there close, where it kind of did the same thing, where it really allowed some of the other genes to break through and have some really high contrast. But I think, kind of looking through all these dark morphs, I'm thinking, if I was to choose just one dark morph out of all of them, it might be the Blackhead. It's looking pretty good with a lot of these combos. So here is the Leopard. The Leopard's kind of interesting. A lot of people consider the Leopard to be a dark morph, and I'd say it's kind of a pseudo dark morph when it comes to the Leopard. Essentially what the Leopard does is it jumbles up the pattern, and all the black on the snake, it gets really dark. I've actually seen some combos where you mix Leopard in with like Coral Glow. It doesn't have much of an effect, but if you actually mix it in with other combos that have a lot of black, it really intensifies the black of the snake. And you can see on the Leopard, it doesn't really have the super black head as in the Blackhead, and when you actually add Blackhead to this, it doesn't really change that much. If you actually look at some of the highlights on the Leopard, some of this, it already starts out pretty dark as far as the background, and when you actually add Blackhead, it makes it even like a super jet black dark, almost like an ink jet black. It's kind of interesting, and the Blackhead seems to maybe bring a little kind of color up along the belly. Maybe you get some little flames down here, and it really darkens the head. Makes for a really awesome combo. Here is the Pied. The Pied is a recessive mutation, and when it comes to blackheads and pieds, I think a low white pied is probably the most impressive when you're mixing it with blackhead. And a lot of people go for the high white pieds. As a matter of fact, when I started in ball pythons, the high white pieds were the most expensive. And personally, I kind of like the 50-50 white and color on the pied. And take a look at what happens when you actually breed pied and blackhead together. You get a really awesome looking snake. You can see a lot of the black coming right down the top, and it really brings in a lot of the orange on the snake, which is pretty awesome. I really love this combination, especially in the low white pieds. And it's kind of interesting, the low white pieds are usually the least expensive. As a matter of fact, you can actually take Enchi and work it into pied, and you always get a low white pied if it's an Enchi pied. So probably the ultimate combo would actually be the Enchi Blackhead pied if you're looking for a really low white pied with kind of a dark top and an orange color. That looks really awesome. Here is the Black Pastel. The Black Pastel is also another dark morph. As a matter of fact, the Black Pastel is an ingredient in the Panda Pied. The Panda Pied is a really jet black and bright white snake, really awesome. It's actually a super Black Pastel and the Pied together. And mixing two dark morphs, sometimes you can have some really awesome results, especially if you're looking for a really impressive dark morph. This is what happens when you mix the Black Pastel in with the Blackhead. So this is the Blackhead Black Pastel. Take a look at this snake. It's kind of interesting. On this one, this is actually the Barnhart Black Pastel, which is a certain line of black pastels, and a lot of people actually don't specify the lines of certain genes. Like, for example, you know, most people kind of lump all the pastels and the black pastels together and don't really specify lines, and every now and then you'll get someone that has a line that's a little bit different and unique, and they'll actually put a name on it and kind of trace the origins of that one. So if you're kind of wondering what the Barnhart is, that is just another line of the black pastel. But if you actually look at the combination of these, it's kind of interesting how you get almost the streaking. It almost looks similar to the super Blackhead, really close when you actually have two morphs together. I'd say, you know, it's kind of interesting because you actually start mixing dark genes together, and sometimes it can be completely unexpected. Sometimes you can actually get completely black patternless snakes, and sometimes you can get a lot of streaking. Sometimes you get a lot of white coming up on the belly. This is a pretty awesome combo. So here is the Coral Glow. The Coral Glow is a codominant morph, and as a matter of fact, a lot of people originally confused the Coral Glow with albinos. They thought the Coral Glow was a different form of albino. Come to find out, the Coral Glow is actually codominant instead of recessive. So if you breed a Coral Glow to something, half the offspring come out as Coral Glows, versus if you had like an albino, you breed it to something else, all the offspring have one copy of the albino gene and they all look normal. And this is what happens if you take Blackhead and you mix it in with Coral Glow. Take a look at this. It even overwhelms the color of the Coral Glow and gives you a really dark background. And the interesting thing is Coral Glow is usually really visually dominant. So you start mixing it with other genes and you always see a really strong influence of Coral Glow. As a matter of fact, if you take a gene like Pastel and you mix it in with Coral Glow, sometimes you can't even see the Pastel or other genes in Coral Glow. In this case, you can really see a really dominant effect of the Blackhead. So this is the last one I wanted to show you. This is a GHI. The GHI is also another really dark morph. I'd say it's really close to the Blackhead, but it's not quite as intense when you start mixing it with other combos. I've actually seen the fire in the GHI, and the fire significantly lightens the GHI versus when you actually compare that to the fire and the Blackhead. This is what happens when you take the GHI and you mix it in with a Blackhead. Take a look at this. You get a GHI Blackhead, and kind of the first thing that struck me is it completely changed the color to kind of like a coppery color on the snake, which is kind of interesting. And you can definitely see the influence of the GHI on the snake, and I would have actually expected that this would be a lot more black instead of a coppery color. Sometimes it's kind of unexpected when you start mixing these genes together, and you can definitely tell the head on this is really solid from the Blackhead. Makes for really awesome combo. Alright, so it is time for the question of the day. And Mike Irwin asks, how many snakes do you actually have? And that is a very good question. I'd say most times I don't even know how many I have because I'm always hatching some out and I'm selling them, so the number always changes. I actually went through and counted them. It looks like right now I have 59 snakes in my reptile room here, including my 2 reticulated pythons and 1 corn snake. All the other ones are ball pythons. And I actually have about 10 of them for sale. I'd say on average, I probably have about 50 breeders and holdbacks that I'm keeping. Actually, actually increases more and more every year because I keep holding back more and more of the really awesome combos that I produce. And then I start selling some of the older ones that I don't use anymore, or some of the stuff that's redundant, kind of like the multiple males and stuff like that. So the number always keeps changing. As a matter of fact, I was thinking maybe on my next video, I'll go through all 59 snakes and kind of give you a sneak peek at all the snakes that I actually have here in my reptile room. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.